Alrighty. So hello everyone. Welcome to the Summer of Access webinar series. This is brought to you by L'Etoile Education and the Accessibility Learning and Development Community. I am Nicole L'Etoile, and I want to welcome you all, and I want to get us started right away. You're here for the session, The Accessibility Army of One, 3 permission-free workflows for exclusive design. A couple of reminders with Zoom. This is a Zoom meeting, not a webinar, so please stay muted unless speaking. Use the chat or raise hand if you have a question at the end. Recordings will be shared in the Accessibility Learning and Development Slack community. I'll also email them out. And we have live captions and transcripts. The chat is enabled, but we do ask you to keep that minimal so that we're not interfering with any of the screen reader feedback or interruptions of the workshop, the work session. Thank you. Okay, Jacob Wood is our first speaker to kick off this wonderful session. Jacob is an accessibility evangelist, inclusive learning strategist, speaker. Sorry, I am way out of practice with my announcing skills
No
here. I'm
problem.
like, and lifelong student of a servient leadership. Jacob partners with organizations to build inclusive learning experiences, improve digital accessibility, and help teams lead with purpose. I mean, he does a whole lot more things. He's just wonderful all around. He believes accessibility is more than compliance. It's about creating opportunities for everyone to learn, participate, and succeed. Please join me in welcoming Jacob. And I am going to turn over the mic to you, Jacob, and then you want me to share my screen for you to continue on.
Yeah, I'll let you know when to share that. I just want to maybe set a couple of baseline details here real quick, and then we'll go ahead and share that.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nicole. I appreciate the introduction, and welcome everybody. Since we are getting started late, I'm going to just kind of jump right into it here. So I wanted to talk about this concept of being an army of one. And before I do that, though, stop me if you've heard any of these statements before related to accessibility when you're building a learning design course. Um, some people might say, we don't have disabled users, so we don't need to worry about accessibility. They might say it's too expensive, so can we maybe do something cheaper? Or maybe it's more important that we engage our users, which is one of my favorite things because that kind of implies that you can't be both engaging and accessible. And I use favorite with a little bit of sarcasm there. If you've ever heard somebody say any of those types of things, this webinar is for you because I'm going to show you how to refute all of those statements, create an accessible course anyway, and not have to ask for permission or wait for budget approval or really consider any of those detractors when you're building your courses. You can make accessibility just part of what good looks like for your learning design. And really, that's what we should be doing, regardless of what our stakeholders think. Um, so let's go ahead and share that screen, Nicole, and we'll go from there.
Okay, Jacob. Your workspace audit is displayed on the screen.
Thank you. So what we're looking at here is kind of a basic messy desk workspace audit. It's part of a security training that might be mandatory for users. Say corporate security wants everybody to go through and learn the ins and outs of security at their office place. Now, one of the issues with this type of training, of course, is that what you're asked to do is select 3 of the 4 objects on the screen and then see if what you've selected is what matches what the designer had intended. Now, picture a screen reader who is trying to attend this security training. What is it that they actually interact with if they can't see what's on the screen? They're told to select 3 security images, but maybe those images aren't properly labeled. Maybe there's no audible feedback to tell them which of the objects is actually selected at any given time. When they do select something, sometimes their keyboard focus is kicked back to the beginning of the slide or mishandled so that they're constantly having to re-tab through the same objects over and over. And if they do somehow manage their way through this and click the submit button, oftentimes those submit buttons aren't the feedback that you get isn't clear, and sometimes it's not even announced to a screen reader user. So this user has already been told that it's mandatory to take this course. They have to do it in order to comply with the security policy. But if they can't take the course on their own without some sighted assistance, then they're already feeling excluded from the organization. That's because somebody at some point in the pipeline decided that it was better to be engaging than to be uh, accessible. And we're going to go ahead and fix this course together. We're going to spot the traps that the common traps that people make when they're building this type of course. We're going to learn how to test those interactions using a keyboard-only workflow, something that doesn't cost your department any additional money. And then we're going to show you some tips on how to frame your conversation with stakeholders that tells them, I did this because it's good and it didn't cost you anything, and this is how it benefits all learners. So you're going to learn how to defend your interactions and your accessibility uh, in a way that makes it a matter-of-fact statement. You're not asking for permission to do this. So before you actually start building anything, when you're still in that design process, there are three really powerful questions that you can learn to ask yourself before you actually start putting things into Storyline or into Rise or iSpring or whatever tool you're using to build your course. So let's assume that you have already storyboarded this activity and you want to begin the development process. But before you do that, ask yourself these three questions. And these are three questions just to get us started, but by no means are these the end all. So as you build your accessibility skills in the future, just note that you might have some additional questions that you add to your repertoire. So question number one that I'd like everybody to ask yourself is, what do learners need to know if they can't see the screen? What do learners need to know if they can't see the screen? So this has to do with how users interact with the course in a non-visual way. You can kind of think about it in terms of the barriers that they might be facing. In this case, they might not be able to see the messy desk icons, that the potted plant, the coffee mug, the laptop, the sticky notes. They might not be able to know which object is highlighted. So when they're tabbing through with their keyboard, how do they know which object is actually in focus? And how do they know which ones they have selected? Because they're told to select three, which means there has to be a way of showing them which ones are actively selected before they press submit. So this question helps us decide what kind of alternative text we might need to apply. And alternative text is a simple description that you add to objects on the screen, particularly images, so that people who are not seeing the screen understand what that image is. But this is also important to ask because it tells you, or it gets you thinking about what they don't need to know. So there might be parts of this desk, like the desk itself, that doesn't actually add any value to the learning context. There might be other graphics on other courses, say a rectangle that you use as a button, or some freehand drawings in a storyline course. These are things that don't need to be announced to the user. So they might be something that you actually take out of the focus order or the reading order. So how do they know what to interact with? It's all about what you choose and that important context that you're trying to convey to them. Not about visually everything that's on the screen, but what matters in the context of the learning experience. So question number two is how do we communicate what the system is doing without using visuals? Or in other words, how might the system communicate without using visuals? So this is about how the user understands what's happening. What happens after they press the submit button? Does a pop-up happen with the feedback? Is it a checkbox or a cross mark that shows whether they were successful or not? Does the system actually move the keyboard focus to that pop-up? Does the user have to go exploring for it? That can mean a world of difference between being able to understand an interaction and being completely lost with it. Are you using only color to convey meaning? So is your feedback green or red? And do you have any other labels that a non-visual or colorblind user might be able to use to get the full context? Remember that not every user can see the difference between red and green, so they also need to understand what the context of that feedback is. So question number 3, how does the user know when something happens? How does the user know when something happens? When you click on something with a mouse, you can usually get that immediate feedback. A icon kind of grays out a little bit, or they get a box around it, or a little checkbox appears. When you click that submit button and the feedback pops up, it's very visual. You know that the pop-up box has happened. You can see the check mark or the cross mark. You can see the text. But if that information isn't actually conveyed to a screen reader user, they might not have any clue what's going on. And it's really important to note that not all authoring tools handle this equally. So in Storyline, you often have to manage the keyboard's focus very manually, whereas something like Articulate Rise does a little bit better job of managing your focus, but not always. So it's important to always test your interactions. And it's really important to think critically about what this question means. Um, so we call these like different states of being. Let's say that when you're selected an object, um, if the object just grays out, or if it gets a box around it to show that it's selected visually, you still have to think about how that is conveyed meaningfully to a screen reader user. Some programs have the option to add what we call a state, as in a state of being, and that might say selected or not selected. It might say pressed or not pressed. It might say um, expanded or not expanded, or expanded or collapsed. Um, but in some programs like Storyline, you have to actually go in and manage those states. They're not just automatically given to the user. Now, if we place a border around an object, if we lighten its opacity, if we expand an accordion interaction, all of these things are very visual. So managing those states, telling the user what's actually happening, is how a screen reader knows that something has changed when we've interacted with it. So when you add a visual indicator, it's important to always add an additional audio indicator. And again, depending on your authoring tool, that might be managed for you. And other times you might have to manage it yourself. It's really important to learn the ins and outs of your authoring tool of choice and test those things for yourself so you know how they're actually being conveyed to the user. So we're going to do a really brief practice session. Um, so go ahead and take another look at the messy desk. We've got the sticky note with a password on it, an open laptop that's unlocked. We've got a coffee mug that's dangerously close to the laptop, and a potted plant that I like to think of as being named Groot. Um, so when the user is actually interacting with this, they need to select 3 objects and then click the submit button. They need to not select one of the 4 objects. So ask yourself and put in the chat your responses here. First, what do users need to know if they can't see the screen? And I'd like you all to think about that for a second and just drop some answers in the chat. Yep, they need to know what objects are on the screen, the name of the object. That's great. They need to know there are 4 objects. That's really good to know. Yes, that the laptop is unlocked. That's important context. They need to know when something has changed and how they're arranged. So some really good tips coming in. Feel free to keep dropping those in the chat. The context, whether something is unlocked or locked, whether the sticky note has a password written on it, those are really important bits for the security training in particular, right? Because that's part of how the learner decides whether that's a security risk or not. So the important context of the image, not necessarily every description of or every color about what that object looks like, but what the object is and why it's important to this particular interaction. It's also important to note that the detractor object, in this case the potted plant, is also added to your descriptions. When I was building this scenario and I was using Google Gemini to generate the code for it, it decided that the potted plant was decorative and therefore not important, and so it tried to mark that object as decorative. And I was like, no, that potted plant is the detractor object. If it's not available for the user to click on, even by mistake, then they don't have the same experience as a sighted user. So it's really important to also include detractor objects in this case, um, because that's part of the critical thinking and the analysis. So question number two, again, go ahead and think about this and drop it in the chat. How does the system communicate non-visually to the user? How does it show them what's happening on the screen when you do something? Yeah, sound or vibrations, yeah. Yeah, so color contrast, and that's also a really important thing to note. Um, Contrast is a little bit outside of the scope of this particular set of questions that I'm asking today, but I'm glad that a lot of you are spotting that because it's important that even visual users can understand what's happening on the screen if they are low vision or have trouble seeing certain types of colors. Using high color contrast is just as important as being able to convey meaning to a screen reader user. Some of the things that we want to make sure that we are um, asking ourselves for this particular question is how do we communicate to the user what is selected or not selected? What happens when you click the submit button? What happens when you decide to unselect an object? These are all things that the system needs to communicate to every user. And we sort of intuitively do that by managing their visual states, but we also need to manage their non-visual states, the labels that give them, and um, the different roles and values of those objects. And so the third question, we've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but how does the user know when something happens on the screen if they can't see the checkbox or the submit button or the feedback? If they can't immediately see what's happening, how do they know what's going to happen? Yeah, the system should give an auditory response. Most authoring tools have the ability to output audio responses. So Storyline has the ability to tell the user what's happening. Rise can and does in most cases tell you what's happening when you press a button, whether you expand or collapse an accordion, for example. Um, but if your authoring tool of choice does not do those things, it might be time to change your authoring tool. I'm not sure exactly about iSpring. I'm sorry. If somebody has more experience, feel free to chime in. Um, but it's important to, yeah, that's a great one, Charles. Um, there is a kind of a lack of awareness around authoring tool guidelines. And so not every single authoring tool is going to behave in the same way. So do check into your documentation or ask a user or test it yourself to make sure that all of these things have the ability to be conveyed. If not, you might need to reconsider the tools that you're using. So I'm glad that we were all able to kind of identify some of those issues and challenges. Um, let's go ahead and move on to the next section here. And Nicole, if I can go ahead and take control now.
Okay, I've stopped my share.
I'm just going to share my screen here in 1 minute.
Chat left run. All plus H right run. 30 notifications on red button. The workspace auto dash has one more. Rate 90, rate 90,
Okay,
rate
I'm
70,
going
rate 60, rate 50, rate 40, rate
to turn this
35, rate
down.
30, rate 25, rate 20. Instructions colon. Select the 3 security risks on this step. Participants can now see your screen.
Is that a slow enough reading pace?
You're in graphic 1. Toggle between broken and fixed versions. From Kathleen S. to everyone colon. Yes. Alert. From Caitlin Bartholik to everyone colon. Yes. Alert.
So you might all hear my Zoom chat going off. And so just for the purposes of this particular demonstration, if we can avoid using the chat at least too much unless you have a burning question. Otherwise, everybody's going to hear it and it's going to get kind of noisy. So what I'm going to do next here, now that we've asked ourselves the questions that we need to know, let's say we've gone into our authoring tool and we've implemented some of the changes that we've decided to make. But we need to test our course now. And I'm actually going to show you what it sounds like when a user tabs through a broken course, and then we'll switch over and see what happens when we've actually remediated it. So right now I am using the NVDA screen reader on Microsoft Edge and Windows 11. And that matters because not every screen reader is going to announce things exactly the same way. If you use JAWS or Windows Narrator or VoiceOver on a Mac or TalkBack, all of these things might announce slightly differently. Um, but the environment that I'm using is a pretty common environment. You might see NVDA with Google Chrome or Firefox a little bit more often. Um, but this all sounds pretty similar when you're just kind of tabbing through things. So for you as a designer, um, the keyboard test that we're going to do today is a very simple, free way that you can check your designs. You don't necessarily even have to have a screen reader turned on to tab through your course and see how the interaction feels. You can just press the tab key on your keyboard and it will jump between every interactive object on the page. You can try to interact with your course and kind of see what happens when you start selecting objects. Now, if you do want to test this with a screen reader, especially if you want to hear what the image descriptions sound like, because a keyboard only without a screen reader turned on is not going to read alt text to you. You can use any of the built-in screen readers that come with Windows or Mac. So in Windows, that's Windows Narrator, and on Mac, it's VoiceOver. You don't need to get permission from your IT department usually to install these. They come pre-built with your operating system. So with NVDA, if you want to use that for testing, you might have to go to your security team depending on how locked down your systems are at work to actually get that installed. Whereas with Windows Narrator, for example, you just hit Control Windows Enter to turn that on, or you can access it through the Start menu. Um, so those are simple tips that you can use to avoid having to ask again for permission or get approval. You just turn it on and test. So with that preamble, I'm going to go ahead and start tabbing through this course, and we'll see kind of what happens when we reach various objects.
Graphic 2 section.
So we have a graphic,
Graphic 3 section.
graphic,
IMG line desk line hazard line final line v2.jpg graphic. IMG line 00991 line laptop line open.png graphic. Coffee line spill line risk line final.jpg graphic. Decorative line plant line 01.jpg graphic. Submit section.
So if you've listened so far, you might hear that what we've had are a bunch of unlabeled graphics and a bunch of images with kind of meaningless alt text. It's just file names. And we can kind of get an idea of what these images are based on the file name.
Decorative line plant line 01.jpg graphic.
Like, I get that this is a decorative
Coffee
plant.
line spill line risk line final.jpg graphic.
I get that this is a coffee spell, but these aren't particularly descriptive.
IMG line 00991 line laptop line open.png graphic.
this just tells me that it's an open laptop, and somebody mentioned earlier that it's important to know that the laptop is unlocked.
IMG line desk line hazard line final line v2.jpg graphic.
This doesn't even tell me that it's a sticky note. It actually tells me in the image description that it's a hazard. If your file naming conventions are to denote that these are hazards, that might give away the whole game.
Graphic 3 section.
You might notice that we have some graphics here
Graphic 2 section.
that don't even have alternative text.
Graphic 1 section.
So let's say I am the screen reader user who is going through this course, and I've kind of explored it now. I need to decide which of these things I'm going to select. And I really have no idea what half of these images are. So
Graphic 2 section. Graphic 3 section.
I'm going to assume that since these don't have any alt text of any kind, these are probably decorative graphics, and they're not part of the challenge.
IMG line desk line hazard line final line v2.jpg graphic.
So I might just start, like, I'm already frustrated at this interaction. I might just start trying to click on these things and see what I can do. I'm just trying to get through the interaction at this point. So I'm going to press the Enter key to activate this item.
The workspace audit heading level 1.
And I pressed it, but nothing told me that the image was pressed. It just said the heading level 1 again. My keyboard focus actually changed.
Graphic 1 section.
And now I have to tab back through all of these things.
Graphic 2, graphic 3, IMG line 00.
So now I know that I'm on the second graphic. I'm going to press Enter again.
The workspace audit heading level 1.
Now I still don't know if anything happened because, again, when I selected that, it just bounced me back to the top of the order.
Graphic 1 section. Graphic 2 section. Graphic 3 section. IMG line desk line.
Now I've begun tabbing through these and I think selecting them.
IMG line 00. Coffee line spill line risk line fine.
I'm going to go ahead and select this one too. Coffee spill sounds like it. Well, maybe a coffee spill isn't a security hazard.
Decorative line plant line.
But maybe Groot here is.
The workspace audit heading level 1.
Now I have to tab back through
Graphic.
this. And this might seem kind of extreme, and I did build this specifically to be an inaccessible example, but I assure you I've experienced courses like
graphic
this
2,
before.
graphic 3, IMG line 00. Coffee lines.
I have no idea what's actually currently selected and what's not. I just have to kind of remember which ones I've pressed on before.
Decorative line plant line 01. Submit section.
And I know I've pressed on 3 of them, so I'm going to hit Submit. Now I press the Enter key, but as far as I know, nothing has happened. If I hit
the
Tab,
workspace audit dash spot.
I actually am outside of the interaction
The
now.
workspace audit dash spot the hazard document. Submit section.
So I now need to turn my screen reader on and start exploring. I have my screen reader going, but I'm in what's called focus mode right now, so I'm only able to tab through things. I need to actually switch into browse mode
Wayne Smith.
and begin looking around.
Clickable submit.
Now I don't hear anything.
Clickable submit. Graphic clickable decorative line plant line 01.jpg. Graphic clickable coffee line spill.
You might notice here with NVDA turned on, these are actually telling me that something is a clickable graphic, whereas before I had no indication that those graphics were actually clickable when I was just tabbing through them.
Graphic clickable IMG line desk line hazard line final line v.
So just for the sake of moving through the interaction, I know that I'm never going to find the feedback here because it's not conveyed non-visually to a user.
Graphic clickable coffee line spill line risk line. Graphic clickable decorative line plant line 01.jpg.
I think I need to
the workspace audit
this.
heading level 1. Instructions graphic 1 graphic 2 graphic 3. Graphic clickable IMG line desk line hazard line final line v2.jpg. Graphic clickable coffee line spill line risk.
And I think that this is the last one that I didn't select.
The workspace audit heading level 1.
That. And then I'm going to jump straight to my submit button. I
no
think
next
here.
Button.
Nope, there's no button on the
Instructions
page according to this.
Graphic
so I
1.
need to.
Graphic 2. Graphic clickable clickable submit.
So we might have also noticed that I pressed the B key with NVDA to jump to the next button on the page, but since none of these are actually buttons, NVDA didn't know what to do. It said that there was no button. I have to manually select this submit button. This is another way that developers sometimes create these buttons that are just an image with some kind of interaction attached to it. but it's not using what we call semantic HTML. So it's not actually a button as far as the screen reader is concerned. I'm
Corey
going to
Grint
go
has
ahead
joined
and
the meeting
press
alert.
this. And I went ahead and submitted, but nothing sounds like it's happening. But I'm going to explore again and see if I found anything new.
Check.
Oh, there is a check.
Check.
That check wasn't there before.
Clickable submit. Check.
Does this mean that I completed the interaction? I don't know for sure. Usually, if you're in a part of a broader course, maybe the next button would become available and I can move on to the next interaction. So this is a pretty representative example of what a poorly designed activity might look like. I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the
Toggle between.
more accessible
Switch off
version.
toggle between broken and fixed version. Toggle between broken and fixed version. Switch off. On.
Now here you heard that the toggle button was switched on. So I actually heard that the state changed. I'm going to tab through this again. And that click was me switching back into NVDA's focus mode, so I can only use the tab key to move between objects right now.
Sticky note with a written password left on the desk. Toggle button not pressed.
I know already that I've skipped over those 3 graphics that didn't have any information before. This tells me that this is a sticky note with a password on it, and it said that it was not pressed.
Unlocked laptop left unattended. Toggle button not pressed.
This is an unlocked laptop left unattended.
Open coffee mug placed precariously close to the electronics. Toggle button not pressed. Decorative potted plant. Toggle button not pressed.
The decorative potted plant. That could probably be given a better description that makes it more of a distractor, but this is an accessibility training, not a security training, so I wasn't trying to make it too complicated.
Submit button.
And we have a submit button. In this case, you actually heard it say button, and you might have heard these other things say button as well.
Decorative potted plant. Toggle button not pressed.
They say toggle button. So this actually tells a lot more information to the user. It's saying what type of interaction it is and whether it's pressed or not pressed. So I can go ahead and
Pressed.
select this, and it tells me it's pressed.
Open coffee mug placed precariously close to the electronics. Toggle button not pressed. Decorative potted plant. Toggle button pressed.
And when I went away from it and came back to it, it was still pressed. So I know that this has actually been selected. That's a really important piece of context that I didn't have in that previous interaction. You'll also note that when I pressed it, my keyboard focus stayed on the object.
Open coffee mug placed precariously close to the electronics. Toggle button not pressed. Pressed. Not pressed. Pressed.
See, I can do this all day long and my keyboard focus remains there. It didn't get bounced back up to the top. That's a really important part of managing the user's keyboard focus. And if you're using a typical authoring tool, you may not have fine-tuned control over that. But just note that there might be some custom interactions that you build in Storyline, or if you ever vibe code something for Rise or some other authoring tool, you need to test those keyboard, the way that your keyboard focus moves around the interaction.
Decorative potted plant. Toggle button.
Now, I've only selected 2 objects so far. I'm going to go ahead and press submit, see what
Submit
happens.
button. Error colon. Please select exactly 3 security risks before submitting.
So that told me as soon as I pressed submit that there was an error, and it told me what was wrong. Whereas before, I couldn't even find the error message.
Decorative potted plant. Toggle button not pressed.
So I'm going to go ahead and remove the potted plant.
Open coffee mug placed precariously close to the electronics. Toggle button pressed.
This is still
Unlocked
pressed.
laptop left unattended. Toggle button not pressed. Pressed. Sticky note with a written password left on the desk. Toggle button not pressed. Pressed.
So we have all 3 of these pressed
Unlocked
now,
laptop. Open coffee mug. Decorative potted plant. Toggle button not pressed.
and this one not pressed.
Submit button.
So when I press submit,
Correct. You have successfully identified the password note, the unlocked laptop, and the coffee spill risk. Correct. Heading level 2.
and it tells me correct. So I'm not relying on color alone to know whether I was correct or not. And it automatically read that to my screen reader. And that can be done in a variety of ways. It can be pushed as an alert to the screen reader, or keyboard can take focus of a pop-up message or a modal. There are different ways that you can make sure that the announcement is made. But the important thing is that I didn't have to go exploring to look for the feedback. So how do you do this yourself? Again, you just publish a preview link of your course, you open it up in your browser, and you start pressing tab. And you start pressing your enter key to try to interact with things, or your space bar to interact with links. And you see what happens. Does your is there a box that kind of follows along where you have things highlighted? That's a focus indicator. Does the keyboard focus follow a logical order? So if you're pressing tab, or if you're holding the shift key and pressing tab to go backward, um, do things follow a logical sequence? On that first interaction, when I pressed on an object, it did not follow a logical sequence because my keyboard focus jumped back up to the top. Whereas with this one, because my focus stayed in place, it was following a logical sequence. These are simple things, again, that you can do whether you have a screen reader turned on or not. And they don't require you to ask, again, for any budget approval. You just publish a preview link and you start tabbing. And you use Shift Tab to go backward, Tab to go forward, Enter to select buttons, Spacebar you can use to press on links. You go through your course and you test out especially any complicated interactions to make sure that the keyboard user can follow along. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my
Screen sharing meeting
here.
can chat left.
Any questions about this so far before we move on to the next section?
Just a heart emoji so far.
All right.
And a thumbs up. This has been great, Jacob.
Great. So let's go ahead then and talk about how do we feel about hidden screen reader instructions. Those can be helpful if they're not overly complex. So sometimes a screen reader user knows enough just by the context of the interaction. Like with that last one, telling me that I need to select 3 objects and then making sure that the objects have those pressed or unpressed states is enough. Like I don't need to be told to press the enter key to select an object and that I'm going to hear that it's pressed or not. If the interaction is particularly complex, like if you actually attempt a drag and drop game and try to make it keyboard accessible, which I don't really suggest, then having specific instructions on how to press spacebar to lift an object and move it can be helpful. But just like with alt text, keep it succinct. So let's say that you have now created that more accessible version of the course, and you need to present your final project to your stakeholders. Even if they had been skeptical of accessibility to begin with, there are some things that you can do to point out how the changes that you've made, or how just the good work that you've done, improves accessibility for everybody and reduces cognitive load, reduces strain on memory. All of these things are helpful for all learners. And I think most stakeholders, especially in L&D, understand the need to reduce cognitive load for learners. So pitching these as something that helps with that can be one way to overcome some objections. But we'll actually go over a couple of some specific tips that you can try here. Just one second while I catch up on my notes. So let's think about the alt text that we gave to those test objects. You can say something like, I added descriptive labels on the objects on the desk to make sure that the context of identifying security risks is preserved for all learners, regardless of how they perceive the course. So making sure that all learners can understand the objective and complete the objective is really important, especially for people who are security minded, for example, or if this is a mandatory training. We want to make sure that all learners can interact with the course without the need for external assistance. I think most people can intuitively understand that if a visually impaired learner needs to go to their manager to get help completing a simple security training, that's not a great use of anybody's time. So if you tell them, I did this, and it's going to reduce the amount of time that the learner has to spend because they were able to engage with the course the same way that sighted users do. That's a pretty powerful reminder that accessibility affects the bottom line in a positive way. Now, there might be other stakeholders who really prefer minimalist designs. You might have encountered these people before who say that they don't like the ugly borders around objects when they're selected. Or can you please just make those objects fade out a little bit when you select them? Um, or can we make these objects on the desk blend into one another a little bit more so that they're not so contrasting, so stark? They might think that the correct or incorrect notices on that feedback are kind of redundant because you've already added the check mark. Why would we need to also say that it's correct? But we know that you can't just use visuals alone to convey meaning. So you might say something like, um, I added these text labels for people who are colorblind or otherwise unable to perceive the differences between the results. This additional context makes sure that all users understand their feedback. And I think intuitively, again, people understand that there's a large portion of the population that is colorblind or can't otherwise perceive um, like those really low contrast kind of objects. Um, so often stakeholders will get this idea in their mind that accessibility is all about screen reader users or people who are unable to use anything but a keyboard. But pointing out that these visual changes are also for the benefit of sighted users can help in a lot of ways break down some of those barriers that are just sort of mentally put in place. So framing this again as a way that benefits all learners, not just visually impaired people, not just blind users or keyboard users, is a way to advocate for the changes that you've made. And finally, um, the selected states or the pressed and unpressed or the keyboard focus order. All of these things do require just a hair bit of additional time. Usually it's like you right click on something and you select the state from a menu, if at all, because again, something like Rise might actually manage those states for you. But in Storyline, if you have to go in and do those yourself, it takes a couple of extra seconds. It's really not a long amount of time that you spend including those. But if your stakeholders are already concerned about time and budget, um, this is something that you can pitch to them to say why it was so important that you took that 5 extra seconds. So you might say something like, I use native states so that the system automatically tracks and announces which hazards the user has already audited. This drastically reduces cognitive load and memory strain so that the user can complete the exercise. And pitching this as more of a cognitive load or memory issue and showing them how um, not having to juggle the state of the object in a user's mind um, can help reduce some of that friction again in terms of how you pitch this to people. So it's about framing it in the way that the stakeholder will understand. Um, and note that none of this, again, required permission. You don't say, can I do this in order to reduce cognitive load? It's, I did this, and this is how it benefits people. That more assertive language often helps put out any fires that you might have, especially when it comes to kind of defending some of the changes or the accessibility features that you've implemented. Now, none of these things required you to do anything extra in terms of building an alternate version of an interaction, right? So we're not building alternatives to the drag and drop feature. We're not developing extra content. We're actually just adding features to content that we're enabling flags that already exist on the content that we have. So rather than maintaining two separate bits of code or two separate versions of a course, which can very realistically impact your development time. All of these things are super simple, quick fixes that don't require you to go over your time allotments or you miss a deadline. It's all about framing things in a way that shows the stakeholders that you're not actually taking extra time or building extra things because accessibility isn't extra, it's just the baseline of how good work is done. Just checking the time real quick. We do have time to do this kind of brief exercise. So what I would like everybody to do, Nicole, do you still have that that you can put up on the screen one more time?
Yeah, I can pull it up for you. Let me do it. Where's my share? Do you want it on the broken version or the fixed version?
On the broken version, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So let's say that you have a stakeholder who wants you to remove the red outline from around the objects. And they want you to do this thing where if you select one of them, it just kind of fades out a little bit. Uh, that's a more minimalist design that they prefer. So what I would like you to do is consider your questions and then consider how you would respond to a stakeholder. If you decided to go ahead and add the box to improve accessibility for all learners, how would you defend your decision to do that in a way that is assertive, doesn't ask for permission, and frames it in a way that is going to benefit everybody? So take a minute or two, and when you're ready, go ahead and drop those in the chat. Yeah, so how would you defend your decision to add some sort of like box or something around the objects that are selected, um, and defend that to a stakeholder in a way that doesn't ask for permission and frames it as beneficial to all users?
Jacob, I wasn't clear on what you
Sure.
meant by the board, but yeah, I think we get it now. Sorry. So,
Okay.
um,
Yeah,
defend
sorry, I know that's a lot.
defend the
Defend
border.
your Yeah, defend your choice to not use the like faded opacity to
Okay.
add a more visible, more stark, contrasty. I don't know. I'm not explaining that very well, am I? Um, defend your decision to improve accessibility. There you go. And also include an auditory message. I appreciate that. I like that. It allows all users to quickly identify which objects that they've selected, reducing the amount of time that they have to spend on this interaction. Time is money. So if they can more quickly breeze through that because they're not having to guess which one they've selected before, that's a really powerful way um, to frame it. I like Charles's statement there. The security of the organization is at risk if they can't do it correctly. Helps with the glare on the screen. That's a really great point. Yeah, faded options might be seen as non-selectable. So those were all some really great ways to frame your defense of this accessibility change. As you can see, there's more than one way to describe your fixes to stakeholders. Sometimes you speak their language. You say the security can be at risk if somebody doesn't get it right. So why would we possibly make it ambiguous? And other times you might just say it's really helpful because it reduces the amount of time or cognitive load. These are all ways that benefit all learners, but also we are speaking in the language of the stakeholder, not having to self-identify. That's a really great point as well. because when a user has to go to their manager and say, hey, I can't complete this interaction, uh, that's self-identifying in a way that they might not have otherwise had to. So just to kind of recap here, when you ask those three questions at the beginning of your design, before you actually start develop anything, that can help you when you get to the development phase to remember to add these accessibility features. We add alt text. We make sure that our states are communicated. We check our focus and our reading order. Those are all things that you can remind yourself to do during development if you ask them before you actually begin. When you use your keyboard testing workflow to check your interactions, you're making sure that what you've uh, implemented is actually solved. If something isn't working as you had expected, you can go back and fix it before it's too late, and long before it ever gets to the quality assurance phase. And finally, when you use matter-of-fact language with your stakeholders without asking for permission, you actually get to implement these things. You get to show what good looks like without having to worry about somebody overriding your decisions because you are the experts in the room when it comes to design. And it's important to be able to defend these types of things, especially when they really don't cost anybody any extra money and they don't take a lot of extra time. They are just what good looks like. And if we get into that habit of framing, this is what good looks like, as opposed to the visual only portion being what good looks like, then we can actually raise the bar for accessibility overall. So just to wrap up, I'd like you all to just kind of think about one additional thing that you're going to do differently next time that you build a course. Um, and you can drop those in the chat. And while you're doing that, I'd like to open the floor for any questions that you might have.
Yeah, and also want to add that when this Zoom ends, a survey question will pop up, and it's the question Jacob just framed or asked about what you'll do differently or what I think there was that question.
Yeah,
So
something like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
something like that. So it will come up as you're exiting the Zoom if you want to hold off and put that in there and save. We could
Yeah.
use this time for questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as we're waiting for questions, I'll put the Summer of Access link in the chat for our future sessions.
Having through test, it's good.
Does anyone want to come off mute, ask a question, or add a question to the chat?
You're welcome. I love that point that it's a big deal in this economy that it doesn't cost more.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacob. This was excellent. I wrote down the questions and I saved them as a reminder. So if you want to grab those questions, I typed those three out in the chat. If we're keep those on a sticky note nearby as you're getting ready to do your next design.
Yeah, and I think Jennifer had a question there. What assumptions can a designer make about a screen reader user? That's kind of a tricky one because every screen reader user is at a different stage in their journey. Um, you can assume that they know how to use their screen reader. If they don't, they're probably not using their screen reader on the job if they aren't at least passively familiar with it. So you don't need to tell them how to use their screen reader. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about instructions. You don't need to tell me to press the enter key to select an object unless you're creating an interaction that uses non-standard selection options. Um, so assume that the user knows how to use their tool. Um, Beyond that, I would assume people have like a basic familiarity as opposed to an advanced familiarity. So I know how to work around a lot of accessibility issues that other people might not because I'm a certified expert. Assume that if uh, your course doesn't meet the web content accessibility guidelines, um, that a user is not going to be able to use it. I might be able to work around some, not everybody might. Um, and I think there was a different question there, but I missed it. Oh, recommending a good NVDA training resource. Um, I actually offer NVDA consulting. I do workshops. You can visit jacobwood.me and select the links to go to my NVDA page. Um, that's a great way to reach out to me if you want some one-on-one help. Otherwise, there aren't a lot of great NVDA courses, which is why I offer the consulting that I do, because like you can watch some things on YouTube. A lot of those are geared toward um, accessibility testers. So they might not necessarily teach you NVDA in the way that you would if you were testing a learning course. Some of them are pretty advanced for more like um, website developers. Um, and then NVDA themselves, if you go to nvaccess.org, they have a book that you can buy, or I think there might be a free resource too on just like basic how-to and getting started guides. Um, but yeah, the reason I do this work is because there isn't a really great resource so far.
Take a look at the link in the chat that I just added. You can learn more about Jacob's offerings, his trainings. Um, we are really just grateful for your time today, Jacob. Thank you so
Yeah,
much. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. And we'll get the recording out as soon as
yeah,
possible.
yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate your engagement today. It was great, and I hope everybody has a good day.